Hello everyone and welcome to the Roundup. Heading into week 15, you have made it to the fantasy playoffs. We are going to go through the biggest pieces of news and the best notes from fantasylife.com to help you dominate the first week of the fantasy playoffs. We've got quarterback news, we've got some running backs and wide receivers that are already rolled out. So let's get into it in the Roundup. All right, like I said, we are now in the fantasy playoffs. Now let's go through some tips from Ian Hartitz on how to navigate through the next 3 weeks and how to get you that trophy. The first tip that I want to talk with you about today, and again, this is at fantasylife.com to go and check out the full article from Ian Hartitz, but you already know, you're starting your studs, but they better be studs. This is the thing. They need to check a lot of these boxes. Talent, are they a real great football player? The volume, is the utilization elite? You're looking at the offensive environment, and of course, you're looking at the matchups. You, again, don't need me to tell you up until this point who to start, who to sit with your studs, because they've gotten you this far. I know that matchups are the one thing in the fantasy playoffs where you might look around and say, this isn't a good place for this wide receiver, for this running back. But Ian Hartitz wrote it out perfectly. Use the matchups as a tiebreaker, but make sure you go to the Fantasy Life rankings and tiers. Make sure you go to the Start Sit tool to figure out what the projections are like as well. We don't want to get too cute in the fantasy playoffs. You all already know that because you are here in the fantasy playoffs. So again, start your studs. Don't need me to tell you. That's where we're going with it. I think this second tip, though, from Ian Hartitz is really important, and that is staying one step ahead with quarterbacks and defenses for the next 3 weeks. We already saw it. Justin Herbert is out for the season. You have CJ Stroud in concussion protocol. So if you're staying one step ahead of your opponents, it's going to pay off. I think Ian Hartitz did a really great job writing out some quarterbacks that you can look at going into this week. I really want to highlight Will Levis here. If you're looking at quarterbacks that you need to stream, we can look at some of his matchups. He's going up against the Texans in week 15, right? 27th in fantasy points per game allowed to quarterbacks. And then take on the Seattle Seahawks, they're 22nd. And then again in week 17, they go up against the Texans. So you've got 2 games against the Texans and the Seahawks. If you're looking for a quarterback that is only 19% rostered, he's the one to go to. We'll also talk about more quarterbacks that you can look at and stream. And of course, I mean, it's the playoffs, so we do have to talk about some defenses here. His favorite option, and this is Ian Hartitz again, is the Rams, 18% rostered in Yahoo leagues. I think we need to talk about how good the Rams have become over these last few weeks. Cooper Kupp is a smash play, Puka Nacua, even Matthew Stafford has been incredible. So when you're looking at defenses to stream, there are a few others here, but like we said, you're starting your studs and you want to stay one step ahead of your opponents. So make sure you're looking already into week 16, already looking into week 17, so that you can dominate and go and get that trophy. There is a wide receiver on the verge of a bigger role and could be a smash play all throughout the playoffs, so let's go through who it is. Rashee Rice has been a topic of conversation for many weeks now in the fantasy community because he should be getting a bigger role, especially inside a wide receiver group that is obviously struggling. Well, I am so excited to tell you that Dwayne McFarland in the utilization report this week said that he believes Rice is on the verge of that full-time role, which should make fantasy managers very, very excited. His 28% targets per route run is 1 percentage point higher than Travis Kelce on the season, and yet he is still in this rotation with guys like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, and of course Justin Watson. But when we look at the utilization that we saw last week in week 14, he registered his highest route participation of the season at 82%. So this is what Dwayne is talking about when he says if we continue to get this utilization, he is finally going to break through. He is averaging right now 19.7 fantasy points per game over the last 3 games. So if that continues like we just said, it is going to be fireworks for Rashee Rice. The one thing I wanted to bring up here too that Dwayne wrote about in the utilization report is basing off data since 2012. Here are his comps. They average 16.6 points per game with a wide receiver 12 finish. And I think you're going to like the names that we're going to read off. Closest comps, Chris Godwin from 2022 with 15 points per game, and Percy Harvin 2009 who averaged 18.1. So we could be on the verge again of this bigger role for Rashee Rice, which is just in time for the fantasy playoffs. So here's hoping that it happens. Justin Herbert is out for the remainder of the season. We've got CJ Stroud still in concussion protocol, so I think now is the perfect time to be going through some quarterbacks that you can stream from week 15 and beyond for the fantasy playoffs. So let's go through some names. Let me start off these streamers by saying I am so sorry if you have to make one of these decisions this week. I am right there with you. It is 2023, and we're talking about Jake Browning, Joe Flacco, Nick Mullins, and Will Levis in a starting spot for the fantasy playoffs. But that's just what we were dealt, so let's make the most of it. Let's start with Jake Browning here, who I personally believe might be the best option for you if he is available on waivers. He has 25.9 fantasy points averaging over the last 2 games. I know that might be hard to believe. He's got ADOTs of 3.9 and 4.7 over those 2 games, but I think that the Vikings defense are going to give him a little bit more trouble than what he's seen in those other games. I still think he is a good option because of the weapons that he has. Let's go over now to Joe Flacco. Yes, again, 2023, and we're talking about Joe Flacco, but over his starts, he's had 15 or more fantasy points in each of the games. So I think, again, a really good spot for Joe Flacco. Browns at home as well. I think that this Bears defense, though, we need to look at them and say, okay, they could give him a little bit of trouble as well. They're 5th in EPA allowed per play defensively since week 7. So this is one where Joe Flacco might come back down to earth just a little bit, but still a good option if you need him. And then, of course, just rapid fire, Nick Mullins. I think the Vikings going up against the Bengals this weekend. I mean, we don't know. They've decided to start him over Josh Dobbs. The coaching staff knows more than us, so obviously they see that he can help them win more than Dobbs, and I think we need to take that into account. He also will get Justin Jefferson back in this spot this weekend, so he is definitely startable and could surprise a few people. And then, of course, we already talked about Will Levis going up against the Texans. I think, again, only 19% rostered. I think that is a good spot too. So Will Levis, Nick Mullins, Joe Flacco, Jake Browning. Let us know who helps you get to the next round of the fantasy playoffs. There is a running back on the rise at just the right time, and Dwayne McFarland is going to tell you just how far James Cook could be taking you in the fantasy playoffs.
If we look across the entire NFL landscape at all of the running backs with at least 100 rushing attempts on the season, Cook ranks 7th in yards per attempt at 4.8, with 14.7% of those carries going for 10 plus yards. That ranks 3rd out of 40 qualifying backs. And we've talked a little bit about his receiving prowess already, but yards per route run, 1.60, that ranks 4th. So let's take a look at the data for the last 12 years and get an idea of what are the comps for James Cook in this new role in the Joe Brady offense. By the way, excluding backs that had large workloads inside the 5-yard line. And the average finish was 15.8 points per game as the running back 13. The top comp in the group was Ryan Matthews. He averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game in 2011. The bottom end was the 2019 iteration of Devonta Freeman, who averaged 14.4 fantasy points per game. Now, here's the good news. Both of those players are above where James Cook is at for the season. He's currently the running back 21, averaging 13.8 points per game. Now, over the last 3 contests, he's averaging 20.1 points per game. And while that is a ceiling that we can look towards with James Cook, I don't know that he can quite keep that up because, again, he doesn't have the carries inside the 5, so that's going to make it difficult to sustain. But like we mentioned, this role in the receiving game, especially in PPR formats, is going to keep him in play. And that's why I've upgraded him to mid-range running back 2 status, but now carrying weekly RB1 spike potential. And over on DraftKings, last weekend, he was $6,000. That's only moved up to $6,300. So still a player that we can take advantage of in DFS tournaments.
Now it's time for one of our favorite parts of the show. We are going to go through our Underdog Pick'em plays for Week 15. But before we get into it, as always, remember, go to UnderdogFantasy.com and use promo code LIFE. That will match your first deposit of up to $100. Such a great promotion that they do every single week. So again, UnderdogFantasy.com, use promo code LIFE. Now let's get into our Pick'em plays for Week 15. All right, now that you use that promo code, let's build out our pick 'em plays for the weekend. We've got 2 of them for you at fantasylife.com. Jeff has been doing a phenomenal job, so I kind of wanted to highlight 2 of his picks that I have already locked in. So let's get it started here. Travis Etienne higher than 53.5 rushing yards. I know at first glance you're saying, why would we be going to Travis Etienne? He's been kind of on the low these last few weeks. We have him projected at Fantasy Life for 64.4 rushing yards, so I think this is a good spot. Jeff kind of brought up the rib issue that he is now 3 weeks removed from, and I think that in this spot against the Ravens, their defense, we have to look at them and say they haven't been as good against the run. They are dead last in success rate against the rush over the period of time from week 10, and the last 3 games they've allowed 4.9 yards per rush, which is the 6th worst in the league. So this is one where I'm trusting Jeff, and I'm also trusting Travis Etienne and our projections to get us over the top there. Our second one, we're going with Tony Pollard, higher than 51.5 rushing yards. Our Fantasy Life projections have him at 62.4 rushing yards on the day. And here's the thing with him. He has gone over 55 rushing yards in his last 5 games. So I look at this one, it's going to be a fun one against the Bills. I want some kind of action on this game besides fantasy football, so that's what we're going with. We're going with Tony Pollard higher than 51.5 rushing yards. We are also going to go with Travis Etienne higher than 53.5 rushing yards. Make sure you go to fantasylife.com. Go check out the rest of this article from Jeff. Does a phenomenal job with some of these plays. And then make sure you go to underdogfantasy.com to lock these in. All right, that was the roundup for week 15. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me here. Make sure you go to fantasylife.com. Make sure you check out our rankings and tiers, our start sit tool, the utilization report, everything you need to win in week 15 and continue on through the fantasy playoffs. Good luck.